I can still feel the cold creeping along my spine, the fog curling around the trees like quiet, watching fingers. It was late, later than I should have been outside, wandering the edge of the black woods that everyone in town whispered about but never dared enter. The only light came from my trembling flashlight, flickering against the bark and the damp, mossy ground. Every rustle of leaves sounded impossibly close, like someone or something was moving just beyond my vision. The air was thick, heavy with a scent I couldn't place, a mix of smoke, wet earth, and something metallic. My breath puffed in tiny clouds, swallowed instantly by the silence. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. I told myself the shadows were nothing. And yet, the moment I stepped deeper, I noticed the small, carved figures hidden among the roots, tiny faces frozen in fear, staring at me. My heart started to pound, not in warning, but in understanding that I wasn't alone. Something in the dark had noticed me, and it was patient, waiting, watching. I wanted to turn back, to run, but my feet refused. That's when I saw it. The trail was quiet. The forest ahead swallowed the last of the pale evening light. Fog hovered low, thick and damp, curling around my boots with every step. Each pine seemed taller here, their branches leaning inward, like they were listening, or waiting. The air carried a hum, faint at first, a vibration that tickled my ears, and then grew sharper, insistent. I thought it was the wind, but the wind never sounded like me. A whisper drifted to the fog, soft, coaxing, mimicking my own voice. At first, I couldn't place the words. They were fragments, questions I hadn't asked aloud, thoughts I hadn't thought yet. I froze. The trail seemed narrower now. The trees pressing closer, their bark rough under my fingertips when I brushed past. Leaves rustled underfoot, but not in rhythm with my steps. It was echoing me. I told myself to keep walking, just follow the trail. The whispers grew clearer. They didn't belong to me alone. They belonged to the space between the pines, to the shadows that stretched and twisted just beyond sight. The fog clung to my skin, cold and wet, and each breath felt heavy in my chest. I realized the hum wasn't just sound. It was movement, something in the air, vibrating alive. I stepped off the trail without noticing. My foot sank into damp moss, and the smell of pine needles thickened, almost choking me. The whisper followed, soft, familiar, pulling me deeper. I tried to turn back. The trail had disappeared. Or maybe it never existed here. Shadows bent strangely among the trunks. The light from the waning sun scattered to fog, making each pine look taller, thinner, unnatural. I thought I saw something move, a pale shape slipping behind a tree. But when I blinked, nothing remained. My own footsteps sounded too loud. Each crunch of leaves a betrayal, echoing back to me in a voice that almost sounded like mine. I pressed my palms to my ears, tried to block the hum, the whispers, but they weren't just sounds anymore. They were inside me, coiling through my thoughts, tracing the edges of my fears. A sudden cold breeze touched my neck. I shivered. The fog seemed to breathe around me, pulsing slowly, shifting the shadows in ways my eyes couldn't follow. I whispered my own name. It came back to me, distorted, sibilant, stretching the fog like it had been waiting. I wanted to run, but the ground felt sticky, the air thick, heavy. Even my voice felt swallowed, dampened by the forest's quiet hunger. The trees leaned closer, and I realized they weren't leaning at all. They were still. The shadows were not. Something moved behind me, slow, careful. I didn't dare turn. I only felt in the space my eyes could not reach. The whispers softened. They mimicked my breathing now, slower, patient, and I understood that they were not leading me back. I stopped. Every step forward pulled me into silence. Every breath tasted of wet earth and pine. The fog thickened. I couldn't see my hands before my face. I couldn't hear my footsteps. I couldn't remember why I had come. And yet, I couldn't leave. I stood there, frozen, the whispering pines surrounding me, leaning closer, breathing with me, and in that heavy, waiting silence, I understood the trail had ended, but something else had begun. Something patient, something waiting. And I didn't move. The fog hung low again. It wrapped around the trees like damp cloth, soft and cold against my cheeks. The forest was silent, yet full of waiting. I walked slowly, boots sinking into wet moss, breath curling in the chill air. Every exhale felt heavier than the last. And then a faint glow appeared, pale, flickering, a lantern drifting between the trunks, too high to touch, too far to reach. Its light spilled over twisted roots, gnarled like hands, grasping, frozen mid-reach. I thought I saw shadows coil around them, stretching toward the lantern as if it were calling. I took a step closer. The silence thickened. Leaves stopped rustling. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Another step. The lantern shifted slightly. A subtle sway, as if nudged by invisible fingers. Every instinct told me to stop. Every curiosity pulled me forward. The fog smelled of damp earth and decay, and the pale light reflected on wet bark, making every branch look alive. I blinked, and it was gone. Just empty fog. Just the muted rhythm of my heart. A soft brush against my arm. A fleeting chill that lingered even when I turned. I realized I was not alone. Soft footsteps, almost my own, echoed in the haze. But when I looked behind, nothing moved. Only the trees, standing still and silent. The lantern returned, drifting pale, untouchable. Its light trembled over roots that reached and twisted, their shapes darker than shadow. It floated just beyond my fingertips, inviting, teasing, unreachable. I leaned forward, hands brushing against moss-covered trunks, feeling the slick dampness, smelling the pungent soil. Every nerve in me screamed to stop, but the lantern called. Silence fell again, not the silence of empty air, but a heavy, patient waiting, the kind that presses on your chest, fills your ears with nothing, and makes the fog seem alive. I blinked, and the lantern vanished once more. Only fog remained, only the soft pulse of my breath, and the subtle, unseen footsteps that followed. Roots stretched and bent beneath the dim glow that had vanished, casting shapes that almost seemed to move. Hands that reached and then froze, like they remembered something long forgotten. The fog swirled around me. It felt intentional, purposeful, as if it wanted me to see without truly seeing, to hear without truly hearing. I stepped forward. The earth was cold, sticky, unwelcoming. Every step felt measured, like the forest counted and remembered them all. And then the faintest hum, not wind, not distant water, a vibration that brushed my chest, a lingering echo that felt alive. I stopped again. The lantern was nowhere, yet I could feel its presence, somewhere just beyond sight, just beyond understanding. Soft footsteps followed, closer now, though I could not see. I told myself it was imagination, but my skin prickled, and I knew it was not. The fog thickened further. Roots bent and twisted under the pale light that lingered in memory. Every shadow stretched longer. Every branch leaned inward. I was alone, yet not. I took a deep breath. The chill filled my lungs, and the forest seemed to exhale with me. I realized then that I could not leave. Not yet. Not while the lantern drifted. Just out of reach, pale and patient, and the footsteps in the fog followed softly, always softly, as if waiting for me to understand something I could not name. And I stood there, the mist curling around my legs, the unseen eyes behind the roots, the lantern gone but not gone, waiting. The fog pressed close again. It clung to my skin, cold and damp, wrapping my shoulders, brushing my hair. Every breath felt heavier, drawn through mist and moss. My footsteps moved softly over the wet ground. The forest was still, but I was not alone. I felt it before I heard it. Soft footsteps matching mine. Careful, deliberate. A rhythm that mirrored my own. But no one was there. I stopped. The footsteps paused too. A tense silence filled the space around me. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I walked again. They walked again. Closer now. Closer, though I dared not turn. The fog thickened. It muffled the low hum of the forest, turned distant rustling into muted whispers. Every shadow seemed to lean, as if peering at me, breathing with me. I felt it in my chest, a pressing weight, like unseen hands, coiling through the fog. A presence patient, waiting. Leaves brushed against my ankles. Cold moisture on my fingers when I touched the tree trunks. A scent of damp earth and decay filled the air, sharp and familiar, like the forest remembered me. The footsteps never faltered. Soft, echoing, never near enough to see, never far enough to ignore. I told myself it was a fog playing tricks. It was a wind through the pines. But the rhythm was too precise, too familiar. Mine, and not mine. I breathed slower, measured each step, hoping it would stop, hoping I could outpace it. A shadow shifted in the corner of my vision, just a blur, or perhaps a shape, slender, watching, waiting. The fog seemed to swirl around it, pulling me forward, pressing against my skin, against my senses. I wanted to turn, to see what followed me, but fear froze my body, anchored me in place. The footsteps grew heavier, not in volume, but in presence. I felt them pressing closer, stretching to the fog into the space behind my chest. A dry leaf crumbled beneath my toes. The motion startled me. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. The footsteps paused again. Just for a moment, I forced myself to glance. Slowly, carefully, eyes scanning the thick gray mist. Nothing moved, but the sense of being watched intensified. Every nerve was alive, tingling with the awareness of eyes I could not see. The pressure at my chest deepened. The forest seemed to inhale, holding me within its damp, suffocating grasp. I tried to breathe through it. Soft, shallow breaths. Listening, waiting. The fog swirled at my feet. Twisting roots reached through the mist like fingers. I felt them graze my ankles, cold, slick, insistent. Or was it the presence again, mirroring the roots, mirroring me? I moved forward slowly. Every step measured, careful, like treading on glass. The footsteps echoed mine. Soft, patient, persistent. The silence of the forest pressed against me. Not absence of sound, but a heavy weight. The quiet that fills your ears with tension. I dared not look again. I dared not move faster. I only felt it behind me, its presence expanding with each breath, with each heartbeat. And then I stopped. The fog thickened further, swallowing even the pale light that filtered through the trees. The footsteps ceased, or perhaps they simply merged with the forest. I stood, frozen, breath shallow, skin slick with moisture. The forest waited. The fog held its shape around me. And I realized I was alone, yet profoundly not. A subtle pressure lingered in my chest. The footsteps had vanished, but the feeling remained. A shadow in the mist, unseen, patient, watching, and I could not move. The forest was quieter than before. Fog lingered in low pockets, curling around roots and rocks, wet and cold against my skin. Every step left a soft imprint in the damp earth. A tree loomed ahead, enormous, ancient, its trunk swollen, hollow at the base, an opening darker than shadow, as if it swallowed the faint light of the evening. I crouched near the hollow. The air smelled of moss and decay, earthy, heavy, lingering on my hands. Inside, faint scratches whispered against the wood, forming shapes I could not comprehend. They seemed deliberate, intentional, and yet wrong. A cold breeze brushed my face. I shivered. The fog curled closer, soft and damp, pressing against my arms. I knelt by a pool of rainwater at the base of the tree. My reflection shimmered in the pale surface. I leaned closer, but it did not move as I did. A flicker of eyes, a shift of lips. It mirrored me in form, but not in motion. I drew back. The scratches inside the hollow grew louder, a soft, scraping rhythm that pressed against my chest. It was neither wind nor animal. Something deliberate, patient, tracing patterns I could not follow. The tree smelled of wet bark and darkness, its hollow mouth exhaling damp air. I reached out, fingertips hovering just above the rim, feeling the chill seep into my skin. The fog thickened, roots twisted around the hollow, black and slick with moisture, like hands stretching toward the hollow, or perhaps toward me. The scratches shifted, a new rhythm pulsing, like the forest itself had remembered something long forgotten. I could not look away. My breath caught in my chest. The reflection flickered again. For a moment, my eyes widened in recognition. And then the motion was wrong. A smile stretched where none should be. Eyes lingered too long, and the water's surface seemed to ripple even without wind. I stepped back, my boots pressed into soggy leaves, cold water soaking through the moss at my ankles. The fog pressed in tighter. The forest exhaled around me, soft, slow, deliberate. I crouched, closer to hollow. The scratches shifted again, forming angles, curves, shapes that seemed almost letters. Though I could not read them, the darkness inside seemed to pulse, inviting, patient waiting. I pressed my hand to the tree, rough bark under my fingers, damp and vibrating ever so slightly. The scratching paused, and then resumed, slower, patient, like a heartbeat echoing through the hollow. I dared to peer in. Nothing moved, only black, and the faint curve of twisted roots, like fingers curled around emptiness. My reflection flickered again in the pool. It lingered longer this time, shifting as though it had will of its own. I could feel it watching me, softly, patiently, from beneath the surface of water and shadow. I backed away. The fog clung tighter to my clothes, cold moisture on my skin. The forest felt alive, breathing around the hollow, pressing it on all sides. The scratches fell silent, but the emptiness of the hollow remained. A weight in the air, a presence lingering just beyond sight. I realized I could not leave yet, not while the hollow waited, dark and patient. And the pool reflected a truth I could not touch. The forest held me in stillness. Roots stretched like fingers across the moss. The fog swirled around my legs, pressing lightly, and the hollow seemed to exhale slowly. I stood frozen, heart slow, breath shallow. The reflection flickered one last time, and I understood I was not alone, not in the hollow, not in the forest, not anywhere the fog curled around me. And the tree waited. The creek was quiet. Its water caught the moonlight, distorted and pale, rippling over stones slick with moss. The night air smelled of damp earth and wet leaves. I walked along the bank, saw footsteps press into the mud, but only my own. The fog curled low over the surface of the water, clinging to my legs, cool and persistent. And then I saw it. A shadow moved upstream, not along the bank, not along the path of the water. It floated, independent, slipping over stones, gliding through shallow pools. The reflection in the creek shimmered oddly. Ripples stretched shapes in ways that made the trees seem taller, the roots more tangled, the air heavier than before. I stepped closer. The shadow moved, patient, deliberate. Its presence pressed into the edges of the fog, making it curl differently, as if the air itself responded. I noticed subtle changes in the landscape. Rocks seemed darker, bark on the trees more twisted, and the faint hum of the night deepened, vibrating through the soil into my feet. The shadow paused, and for a moment, it felt like the creek, the trees, the fog, everything, was waiting for me to blink. I did, and it was gone. The creek rippled calmly. Moonlight reflected off the water in pale lines. The stones were still. The roots no longer reached unnaturally, but the hum remained, soft, vibrating, lingering in the fog. It pressed against my chest, tangled in the rhythm of my heartbeat. I crouched near the water. The scent of wet moss and muddy earth filled my nose. My fingertips grazed the cool surface, and the reflection wavered slightly. Not mine alone, but something else, something patient and watching. The fog shifted. The trees swayed without wind. Every shadow lengthened, curling toward the water, toward the bank where I stood. I took a cautious step back. The shadow did not reappear, but the hum grew softer, as if retreating slowly, deliberately. I leaned over the creek again. The water reflected the moon, still distorted, still slightly off. I traced the ripple with my eyes, and felt that the shadow had moved somewhere beyond sight, waiting for me to notice it again. A soft rustling behind me made me glance over my shoulder. Only fog, only trees, standing silently, only the creek, flowing quietly, carrying reflections and shadows alike. The night held its breath, and I understood that I was not alone. Not in the air, not in the fog, not in the subtle, shifting shapes of the creek. I stepped slowly away from the water, boots pressing into cold mud, fog curling around my ankles, the hum still faintly echoing in my chest. Every step forward stretched the tension. Every rustle in the undergrowth reminded me that the shadow could return at any moment. And yet, I could not bring myself to leave. Not while the pale moonlight reflected off the creek. Not while the shadow lingered unseen, patient, curious, and watching. I paused. The fog settled around me. The creek continued to flow. The moonlight danced on water. And the hum remained soft, subtle, insistent. I breathed slowly. The night waited with me. The shadow waited beyond sight, and I stood alone, yet profoundly not. The creek, the fog, the hum, all carried its presence, and I could only watch. The forest was still. Fog drifted low along the uneven ground, curling around roots and rocks, cold and damp against my ankles. Branches trembled above me. No wind stirred the air, yet they shivered, quivering in the pale light. I stopped. Every sense prickled. The forest held a hush, like it was waiting. Something shifted above. Heavy, unseen, it pressed against my awareness. A subtle weight on my chest, as if the air itself remembered me. A cold breath brushed my neck. Fingers of frost crawling along my skin. I shivered involuntarily. The fog pressed closer, clinging to my clothes, damp and persistent. I looked up. Only silhouettes of swaying branches remained. No shape. No movement I could place, just the rhythm of the trees bending in silence. The tremor in the branches continued, slow, deliberate, like a pulse. Every now and then, a twig rattled against another, sharp and sudden in the quiet. I stepped forward. The earth was soft underfoot, damp leaves clinging to my boots. The fog drifted in currents around me, cold and wet, wrapping my hands and arms. The pressure above shifted again. Heavier now. The forest seemed to lean inward, and I felt in my chest, in the back of my neck, in the air that tasted of damp pine and decay. The branches swayed. Shadows stretched along the moss and roots. They bent, twisted, reaching outward. Not wind, not animal. Something else, subtle, deliberate. I tried to steady my breathing. Soft, shallow inhales through my nose. The fog whispered across my cheeks. My skin prickled. Every nerve stretched tight, alert. A sudden rustle overhead. No shape, no branch falling. Just movement, and the weight above intensified. My hair stood on end. My fingers grazed the bark of a nearby trunk. Rough, damp, grounding me against the invisible pressure. I dared to glance upward. Only the silhouettes of branches swaying, casting elongated shadows over fog and moss. I blinked. The rhythm of movement paused for a moment, as if waiting for me to notice, to acknowledge its presence. The forest exhaled slowly around me, a subtle hum in the air vibrating through my chest. I stepped back, careful, deliberate, every footfall pressed into the damp earth, disturbing leaves, moss, roots. The tremor continued, soft now, but constant. The unseen weight lingered, pressing lightly, insistently, through the fog, through the branches, through the very air I breathed. I pressed my palms against a nearby tree. Rough bark and wet moss under my fingers. The forest seemed alive, aware of me, the rustling above both warning and invitation. I swallowed hard. The fog wrapped more tightly around me. Every shadow seemed to stretch, bend, and shift. I could feel the pressure moving along with the trembling branches, weight and presence paired. Time slowed. Each moment stretched. The rustling above lingering in my mind, soft yet insistent. The cold on my neck faded slightly. The branches swayed more gently now. The silhouettes blurred in the fog, becoming just shapes again. And then silence. Not the absence of sound, but a presence held still, watching, waiting. I exhaled slowly. The forest settled, but the weight lingered, soft and patient. I knew it had not left. I stepped forward carefully, fog curling around my boots. The branches swayed lightly above, casting shadows across the moss. The air hummed faintly. I could feel it, unseen, pressing gently through the fog, a reminder that the forest was alive, and I was not alone. I walked on, slowly, deliberately. The trembling above faded into memory, but the sense of awareness remained, lingering in the mist and the cold, in every quiet breath I took. And the forest waited. The river stretched beneath me, gray and still, fog curling low over the water. The footbridge ahead was broken, wood swollen and dark with moisture, planks uneven, warped. It arched across the mist like a fragile memory. I stepped onto the first board. It creaked softly, echoing strangely, as if the sound carried farther than it should, not just over the river, but somewhere inside me, stirring memories I could not name. The fog pressed against my legs, cold and damp, clinging to boots and sleeves. Each breath drew in wet air and the scent of moss. I moved forward. Another plank groaned under my weight. The echoes multiplied, soft at first, then stretching, bending, like whispers trapped in the air. The river was silent, but the echoes held something of the past. I felt in my chest, a pulse, a pull, a sense of moments I could not recall. Midway across, the planks shivered, groaning under an invisible weight. I froze. The fog thickened, curling around my shoulders. It pressed at the edges of my vision, shaping itself into forms I almost recognized. Shadows stretched along the boards, tall and thin, moving with the rhythm of the echoes. Not quite solid, not quite there, but present enough to unsettle me. The air smelled of wet wood and river mud. Each inhale filled my lungs with chill, and the echoes tickled the back of my mind, replaying fragments of sound I did not know I remembered. I stepped carefully. The boards creaked beneath me. Each echo grew heavier, pressing against the fog, pressing against my chest. Shapes flickered in the mist. I caught glimpses of forms that seemed human, stretching and bending with the fog. They vanished when I blinked, leaving only whispers and the groaning boards beneath my feet. The river below shimmered faintly in pale light, reflecting nothing but fog and shadow. Every plank felt fragile, as if it could disappear into mist at any moment. I held my breath. The echoes multiplied again, filling the space around me. Each step forward carried memory, a memory I could not place, and yet recognized. The fog wrapped around my arms and legs, cold and wet, soft as a hand brushing against my skin. I felt it tug slightly, pulling me toward the middle of the bridge. A plank groaned loudly. I paused. The echo lingered too long, stretching farther than sound should reach. My own heartbeat joined the rhythm, slow, deliberate, uncertain. Shapes formed in the fog, tall, thin, bending, hovering just beyond clarity. They moved with the bridge's creaks, silent and patient. I stepped forward again. The board shifted slightly underfoot. The fog swirled. Each echo pressed into the river, folding into itself, folding into me. The middle of the bridge seemed endless. Shadows flickered along the boards. The river stretched outward, pale and still beneath the fog. The echoes hummed softly, insistent, lingering, intimate. I paused once more. The bridge groaned beneath my weight. The fog shifted, curling at my boots, tangling in my sleeves. Shapes stretched, twisted, and the echoes stretched with them, bending memory into the air. I finally reached the far side. The last plank creaked, and the fog thinned slightly. The river flowed quietly again. Shadows receded, but the echoes remained, soft, subtle, brushing at the edges of thought. A hum in the damp air, a memory that did not belong to me, yet lingered. I stepped off the bridge, feet pressing into cold earth, fog clinging to the back of my neck. The river was silent, the bridge still, but I knew the echoes had not left. They followed me in subtle ways, pressing against the fog, pressing against my chest, lingering in memory and in the quiet of the night. And the bridge waited, silent, broken, patient, for the next footsteps. The trees thinned slightly. A cabin appeared ahead, worn and abandoned. It was gray with age, roof sagging under years of snow and rain. A soft flickering light spilled from a cracked window, warm in color, but unsettling in its irregular rhythm. I stepped closer. The fog clung to my legs, damp and cold, curling around my boots, pressing lightly against my skin. The air smelled of wet wood and moss. I could taste the chill on my tongue, thick and heavy in my lungs. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was small, Shadows clung to corners. Walls etched with symbols. Strange, curling shapes that seemed alive. I thought I saw them shift when I wasn't looking directly. A curl here, a line there, moving subtly, just at the edge of perception. A low hum filled the air. Not wind, not distant water. It vibrated through the floor, the walls, through my chest and down into my feet. The air thickened, every breath heavy, deliberate. I touched the wall. The wood was rough under my fingers, cool and damp. The symbols felt etched deep, almost pulsating beneath my skin. The flickering light danced over the room, casting shadows that moved independently of the light. A table, a chair, each shape stretching slightly as I blinked, subtle, wrong, like reality itself was breathing. I stepped back, boots pressing against the worn boards, fog seeming to curl up from the floor to meet me. The hum grew softer, yet more persistent, wrapping itself around the walls, around the ceiling, around me. I turned toward the door. Something shifted in the corner of my vision, a shadow perhaps, or a symbol rearranging itself. I blinked. It was gone, but the hum lingered. Thick, insistent. I stepped outside. The chill of the forest hit me, wet and biting. The fog hugged my shoulders. I thought leaving would end it. It did not. The hum followed, through the trees, over roots slick with moss, pressing against the fog, brushing my neck, curling around my chest. I moved faster. Branches brushed my arms. Leaves whispered underfoot. The light from the cabin flickered in the distance. The shadows inside seemed to stretch toward the forest, pulling the hum with them. I glanced back. The cabin remained, still. But the symbols, the light, the hum, they were in the trees now, lingering, patient. I tried to focus on the path, boots pressing into wet earth. Fog curling higher now, dense and damp. Each step carried the hum deeper into my mind. Every breath tasted of cold moss and wood smoke. The flicker in the window pulsed in rhythm with the hum. Slow, deliberate. Not quite a heartbeat. Not quite the forest. Something else. Something patient. I stumbled on a root. Hands pressed into wet earth. The hum pressed back against me. Soft, subtle, wrapping into the fog, following the shape of my body, settling behind my ribs. The cabin's light dimmed slightly. The forest swallowed it, and yet the hum remained, a presence in the mist weightless, yet impossible to ignore. I stopped, breath shallow. The fog wrapped tightly around my legs, soft and wet. The hum vibrated faintly, as if waiting for me to notice. I stepped forward again, each motion careful, deliberate. The forest seemed to lean inward. The fog shifted with each step. The light from the cabin flickered in my memory, casting the hum into the trees, a reminder that I was not alone. And as I disappeared further into mist, I knew it followed. Patient, persistent, a weight in the fog, a flicker in the night, and a hum in my chest. The cabin waited. The path narrowed between dense trees. Fog curled along the ground, wet and cold, pressing against my boots with every step. Branches reached overhead, twisting together, forming shapes that seemed deliberate. Shadows stretched along the trunks, moving independently, leaning toward me, curling away. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. Every breath felt heavy, thick, as if the forest itself pressed against my chest. I walked slowly, footsteps soft against the soil, leaves brushing my ankles. The fog muffled the distant river, muted the rustling in the undergrowth, and then I heard it, low laughter, not loud, soft, almost playful, but hollow, echoing from nowhere. It slid along the path, curling around the trees, wrapping itself into the fog. I froze. The shadows above twisted. The path seemed longer, stretching further than it should. Every tree leaned inward slightly, as if peering at me, watching me step forward. I moved again, careful, deliberate. The fog clung to my legs, wet and heavy. My fingers brushed against bark, rough and slick with moisture. The laughter echoed again, closer now, and yet still impossible to place. It seemed to slide along the soil, between roots, under leaves. Shadows shifted faster now, twisting across the path, stretching, curling, moving independently of the trees. I blinked. They altered subtly. A branch would sway where it had been still. A shadow stretched where none should be. The path narrowed even more. The fog pressed higher, around my chest, my arms, my neck. I could feel it brushing my hair, curling around my clothes. Cold and damp, alive in its weight. The laughter pulsed softly, mixing with the hum of the earth beneath my boots. Every footstep carried it closer, but it was never behind me, never ahead, always around, hovering in the fog like a presence waiting for me to notice. I touched the trunk of a tree. Rough, wet bark under my fingers. A shadow flickered across my hand. I blinked. It lingered, almost watching, twisting along the path. The forest seemed to breathe with me. Every inhale drew in fog and damp earth. Every exhale carried the soft, hollow laughter, sliding between trees and roots. I could feel it brushing my skin, pressing lightly into my chest. I stepped forward again. The path felt endless. Shadows twisted further, distorting the shapes of roots and trunks. The fog shifted as I walked, curling around my legs, around my arms, around my chest. The laughter returned, soft, hollow, patient, not chasing me, not demanding, but present, echoing in the gaps between my senses. I paused, closed my eyes. The fog thickened, pressing against my face, weaving into my hair, touching my skin like cold fingers. When I opened my eyes, the path had not changed, and yet everything seemed subtly wrong. Shadows leaned slightly more. The fog moved with intention, and the laughter lingered, just at the edge of hearing. I kept moving, footsteps slow, soft, deliberate. The trees whispered with unseen breath. The shadows twisted with every blink. The fog wrapped tighter around my legs. And I realized I was alone, yet profoundly not. The path stretched before me, narrow, endless, fog pressing at my sides. Shadows curling, twisting, watching. The laughter echoing softly, and the forest breathing around me. I could not tell where it began, where it ended, only that it waited, patient, unseen, and I walked through it, through fog and shadow, through the hollow path. The fog hung thick among the trees. It clung to branches, to roots, to the soles of my boots, cold and damp. I walked slowly. Every step pressed into wet soil. The air smelled of moss, earth, and decay. My breath rose in pale clouds, tangling with the mist around me. Then I saw them, pairs of faint, glowing eyes, just beyond the fog. Silent, watching, patient, I stepped closer. They vanished. No rustle, no movement, just emptiness in the faint memory of their gaze. I paused, shivering. The fog pressed tighter around my legs, clinging like cold fingers. A soft hum seemed to vibrate through the air, through the ground beneath my boots. I moved again. The eyes reappeared, closer now, hovering at the edge of the fog, unblinking, watching. I turned slowly. The trees stretched endlessly. Shadows leaned forward, twisting in the dim light. The fog shifted with each breath I took. I reached toward the nearest glow, and it disappeared. Only the faint hum remained. I stepped forward, blinked, closer. The sense of direction collapsed. Paths twisted, doubled back. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow mirrored another. I could not tell left from right, up from down, forward from backward. The eyes appeared again, pairs, silent, glowing softly, closer than before. They lingered, pressing into my awareness. I felt the fog brush my face. The cold seeped into my hair. Each step I took carried a wet, earthy scent. The eyes shifted with me, always just out of reach. I stopped. The forest held its breath. The fog curled between the trunks, pressing lightly against my chest. The glow pulsed faintly, like distant stars trapped in mist. I moved cautiously. Branches brushed my shoulders. Roots tangled my boots. The eyes reappeared again, hovering in the fog. Closer still. I blinked, and they vanished. But the hum persisted low, vibrating, pressing gently into my chest. I stumbled slightly, hands pressed into wet moss and bark. The fog swirled around me, soft, damp, unyielding. The eyes were formed, closer than ever, watching silently. I spun slowly, trying to find a way out. Every path looked identical. The fog twisted in currents, shaping shadows that leaned toward me. The air was thick, almost solid, and every breath drew in damp earth and cold mist. The eyes moved again, pairs, glowing faintly, always just at the edge, hovering, patient. I froze, shivering. The forest whispered around me, branches creaking, fog curling, and the hum vibrating through the soil. I took another step. The eyes vanished. Silence pressed into my chest. Then they reappeared, closer, watching. I turned slowly, leaned against a tree. Cold bark pressed into my palm. I could feel the forest holding me, fog curling around my legs, pressing at my hair. The eyes lingered, faint, distant, unblinking. I breathed slowly. Every exhale fogged the air in front of me. The eyes shifted closer again, soft light pulsing. I tried to follow, but the forest bent, twisting paths, turning shadows, making the world endless. The hum pressed lightly in my chest, in the mist, wrapping itself around me. The eyes hovered, patient, insistent, unmoving and everywhere at once. I kept walking, step by careful step. The fog thickened. The eyes reappeared with every blink, always closer, always watching. And still, the forest stretched endlessly, shadows twisting, fog curling, the hum vibrating softly. I was alone, and yet profoundly not. The eyes lingered, waiting in the fog, watching, and I moved deeper into the endless woods, never knowing where the path ended or if it ever would. The forest held a quiet stillness. Fog curled around the roots and trunks, cold and damp, pressing lightly against my legs with every step. A low, melodic hum drifted through the trees, soft, almost musical, carrying with it a strange weight, shaping the air. I paused. The fog shifted, curling higher around my chest. The scent of wet earth and pine clung to me. The hum resonated in my ears, and under my skin, a subtle vibration in my chest. Shapes began to form in the fog, figures dancing just beyond reach. Tall, thin, swaying in rhythm with the notes. Not quite solid, not quite imagined. I stepped forward. The ground was wet beneath my boots. Leaves pressed cold against my ankles. Branches brushed my arms, rustling softly, echoing the hum in whispering vibrations. The figures shifted, curving, stretching, moving in patterns that my eyes could barely track. Every note seemed to shape them, pulling them into forms that almost made sense. I moved closer, unsure if I was drawn forward or deeper into the unknown. The fog thickened. It pressed along my shoulders, my neck, wet, soft, insistent. The hum rose slightly. The notes folded into the trees, dancing along the branches, weaving between leaves and roots. Every sound seemed alive. A voice, a memory of something I could not name. I touched the tree. Rough bark pressed into my fingers, damp and cold. The fog curled higher, shaping itself around me, following my movements. The dancing figures shifted again. They leaned closer, then stretched away, tangling with the fog, intertwining with shadows. The hum pulsed in response, low, melodic, hypnotic. I inhaled. The air smelled of wet pine and cold moss. The notes vibrated in my chest, pressing lightly, pulling me forward with soft insistence. I stepped cautiously. The ground pressed uneven beneath my boots, roots and mud tugging at my steps. The figures moved with me, dancing between shadows and fog. Not reaching, not retreating, just existing, persistent and patient. The hum rose again. Shadows stretched with the notes. The fog twisted, curling around trunks, weaving between branches, pressing softly against my face. I blinked. The figures seemed closer, their shapes more defined, though still just at the edge of clarity. They moved with the melody, their rhythm tied to the wind, to the song, to me. I stopped. The forest held its breath. The fog settled around my chest and arms, soft and damp, and the hum lingered, low, melodic, insistent. I could not tell if I was moving closer or being pulled deeper. The figures danced still, silent in form, alive in presence. The fog shifted subtly, pressing closer to my legs, my neck curling around my hair and shoulders. I stepped forward again. Leaves pressed underfoot, cold and wet. Branches brushed my face. The hum wrapped into the fog, weaving along roots and bark, shaping the space into forms I could not name. The figures swirled in time with the melody. The fog clung tighter, damp, soft, alive. I moved slowly, deliberately, tracing the song through the mist. A soft breeze stirred the notes. The figures bent with it, leaning, stretching, and the fog responded, curling like liquid, pressing lightly along my skin. I paused once more, closed my eyes. The song vibrated through my chest, through the mist, through the branches above. The figures danced on, just out of reach, shaping themselves with each note. I opened my eyes. The forest was still, yet alive with movement. The fog shifted, shadows twisted, and the melody pressed into my chest. I stepped forward slowly. The wind carried the hum farther into the trees. The figures faded slightly, leaving shapes that twisted gently in the fog. The air smelled damp and alive, and the hum lingered softly, persistent, patient, a presence I could not name, guiding me, watching me through the forest, through the fog. And I walked, step by careful step, through shadows and mist, following the song, never sure if I was closer or deeper into the unknown. The forest thinned slightly, and a cold breeze brushed along my neck. Ahead, a massive stone rose from the ground. Its surface was rough, slick with damp moss. The air smelled of wet earth and mineral, heavy and sharp. The stone was hollow. A faint glow seeped from a crack near its center. Soft, pale, almost inviting. Yet the light seemed wrong, alive in a way that made my chest tighten. I stepped closer. The fog pressed along my boots, wet and cold. Branches scraped against my arms, rustling softly in the stillness. Shadows flickered inside the hollow. Impossible angles, shapes that bent against reason. They moved like liquid, shifting faster than I could track. I blinked. They changed. The glow pulsed faintly. Each pulse stretched the shadows further, twisting them along surfaces that should not exist. The air was thick, vibrating softly against my chest. I crouched slightly, peering into the hollow. The interior seemed alive. Walls rippled, folded inward, and the shadows danced along surfaces that bent against physics. I could see depth where there should be none, curvature where the stone should be flat. A low hum emerged, not loud but persistent, vibrating under my feet, through my legs, wrapping around my chest. The fog swirled with it, curling higher along my shoulders. I leaned closer. The air smelled faintly metallic, like iron and rain. The glow pulsed again, and the shadows bent toward me, stretching along walls that shouldn't exist. I reached a hand near the opening. The stone was cold under my fingers, rough and slick at once. The glow shifted in response, brightening then dimming. The shadows moved faster. I could feel them watching, pressing lightly against my awareness. The fog pressed closer. Cold, damp, alive. A subtle vibration hummed in my chest. The hollow seemed to breathe with me, its rhythm slow, deliberate, patient. I tried to step back. Boots pressed against wet moss. The stone seemed taller, wider, its hollow deeper than it should have been. The shadows stretched into corners that did not exist, curled along edges that defied logic. I blinked. The shapes shifted again, waving, bending, folding. The glow pulsed softly, casting light across branches and fog. It seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I crouched again, closer, trying to understand. The air smelled of damp stone, of moss, of the faint metallic tang of the hollow itself. The fog curled at my knees, pressing upward, brushing my arms and face. The shadows moved in impossible ways. They slithered along curves that shouldn't exist, flicker along surfaces that warped with a faint glow. The hollow seemed aware of me, patient, watching. I stepped back fully. The stone remained. The glow pulsed faintly, and the shadows bent, folded, and moved against all sense of physics. The fog wrapped tightly around my legs. The hum lingered low, insistent, pressing lightly against my chest. I turned slightly. Branches scraped against my shoulders. Leaves rustled, wet and cold. The glow of the hollow seemed to reach out into the fog, stretching along roots and stones, casting the shadows outward, twisting them against the forest floor. I moved slowly away, step by careful step. The stone remained, its hollow alive, glowing softly, shadows shifting in impossible patterns. The air hummed lightly in rhythm with my chest, the fog curling with me as I retreated. And yet, I could feel it following, the presence in the hollow, patient, aware, pressing into the forest with subtle insistence. I did not look back. I could feel it. The hollowed rock glowed faintly in my memory, its shadows alive in the fog, and I walked slowly into the mist, uncertain where it began, or if it ever ended. The trail narrowed beneath the trees. Fog pressed along the ground, clinging to my boots, wet and cold. Branches scraped softly against my arms. The air smelled of damp moss and rotting leaves. Every breath tasted faintly of earth. Then I saw them, small lights, flickering like blinking eyes. They hovered just beyond the fog. Silent, patient, I stepped forward. The fog muffled my footsteps. Wet leaves pressed cold against my ankles. The lights shifted with me, weaving between the trees. I blinked. They vanished. And yet, I could feel them, watching. I moved cautiously. Branches brushed my shoulders. Roots tangled my boots. The lights appeared again, closer, hovering just at the edge of the fog. The trail seemed longer, twisting, folding back on itself. I could not tell where it ended, or if it ever would. The lights flickered again, blinking softly, threading through the fog, between trunks, curling along the path. I paused. The fog pressed higher along my legs. Cold, damp, insistent. The lights followed without sound. No rustle, no movement, only presence. I stepped forward slowly. Footfalls muffled. Leaves and mud pressed under my boots. The fog thickened, twisting around my chest and neck. The lights flickered again, closer still, hovering like faint fireflies, but somehow heavier. I turned. Nothing. Only fog. The lights reappeared ahead, then vanished, then reappeared beside me. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Every tree leaned in, branches curling in the fog. The air smelled of wet bark and faint metal. I could feel the pressure of the fog on my chest. The lights blinked patiently, watching. I walked again, step by slow step. The fog clung to my legs, pressing like cold fingers. Every blink brought the lights closer, hovering just at the edge of perception. I stopped once more. The trail stretched endlessly before me, twisting, folding, bending. The lights flickered softly, threading around trees, sliding along roots, always present, always just beyond touch. I moved. The fog thickened further. Every sound was muted. The world felt damp, cold, pressing against my skin. The lights blinked again, closer, unblinking now in presence, if not in form. I reached a hand out. The fog curled around my fingers. Wet, cold, insistent. The lights shifted in response, hovering closer, moving between the shadows. I stepped forward. Footsteps soft against mud. Leaves crushed under soles. The forest twisted and bent. The trail disappeared in fog. Only the lights remained, blinking, watching. I paused. The fog pressed high against my chest. Every inhale drew in damp earth and mist. The lights hovered just at the edge, like eyes without bodies, threading between the trees, patient and silent. I moved again. Branches brushed my face. Roots pressed cold under my boots. The lights flickered, moving around me, never touching, never leaving. The trail stretched endlessly. The fog thickened around my legs and arms. The air vibrated subtly. The lights blinked in rhythm, patient, insistent, threading closer, and I walked through it, alone but not alone. The lights vanished. A brief pause, then returned, hovering just at the edge of my vision. The fog pressed tighter, wet and cold. The forest breathed around me, holding me, and the trail wound endlessly forward, marked only by the flickering eyes in the mist. The forest was quiet. Fog curled low across the trail, dense and cold. It pressed along my boots, wet, insistent. I breathed in. The mist seemed to enter with me, cold, wet, shared. It wrapped around my chest, soft and heavy. The trees were shadows, bending lightly in the fog. Every branch pressed against the air, rustling softly. Leaves whispered against each other. Shapes began to form, flickering figures in the mist, just at the edge of my vision. Tall, thin, bending, then dissolving into nothing. I stepped forward slowly. Boots sank slightly in damp earth. Branches brushed my arms. The fog pressed higher along my shoulders, curling like fingers, tentative, alive. I blinked. The shapes shifted again. Sometimes animal, sometimes human, sometimes just shadow. Every time I tried to focus, they dissolved, leaving nothing but fog. The mist thickened. Cold droplets clung to my hair, my face, wrapping me in damp stillness. It seemed aware, breathing with me, wrapping around my chest in rhythm with my heartbeat. I moved carefully. Step by step, the trail bent unexpectedly. Branches scraped softly along my shoulders. Roots pressed wet and cold beneath my boots. The fog curled around my legs, insistent, alive. Shapes flickered ahead. They shifted in impossible ways, bending the space between trees. Sometimes the fog thickened in corners, pushed against trunks, forming shadows that breathed. I paused. The mist pressed against my face. Every inhalation drew cold, damp air deep into my chest. I could feel it move with me. Every exhale carried it further along the trail. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Shadows curled and stretched in rhythm with the fog. I could not tell what was solid, what was air, what was only imagined. A subtle vibration hummed through the mist. Soft, low, almost imperceptible. It pressed lightly against my legs, my chest, my arms. The fog rippled in response, shaping itself around roots and branches. I stepped forward again. Branches scraped lightly across my face. Leaves pressed against my boots, cold and wet. The shapes flickered again, appearing just beyond reach, then dissolving instantly. I reached out. The mist wrapped around my fingers. Cold, damp, soft. It slid along my skin like liquid. The shapes twisted in response, shifting, bending, alive in the fog. I breathed slowly. Each inhale seemed shared. The mist moved with me, curling along my chest, pressing softly against my shoulders. It felt aware, patient, watching, waiting. I moved cautiously, step by careful step. The fog thickened around my boots. Roots pressed beneath soles. Branches brushed across my hair and shoulders. The shapes flickered and dissolved again, twisting shadows in the mist. I paused. The forest felt endless. The fog pressed around my legs and chest, alive, curling. I could smell damp earth, wet leaves, and the subtle metallic tang of the mist itself. The shapes formed and dissolved again, like memories I could not hold, shadows of something that might not exist. I walked forward, step by slow step. The mist clung to me, pressing softly, breathing lightly. The shapes flickered and bent with the fog, alive, impossible, watching. I stopped once more. The trail stretched endlessly, twisting and folding under fog. Branches leaned inward. Shadows pressed closer. The mist breathed around me, wrapping my chest and shoulders in cold, wet awareness. I stepped forward again. The shapes flickered near, then vanished. The forest was quiet. The fog pressed still. Breathing with me, alive, I walked on, the mist curling around me like fingers, shapes forming and dissolving, leaving me uncertain, unsure what was real and what was only the fog that breathed. The forest was quiet. Mist curled along the ground, clinging to my boots. Branches brushed softly against my shoulders, wet with dew. The air smelled of damp earth, moss, and something older, something that lingered beneath the trees. I walked slowly, feet pressing soft into the cold soil. Then I saw it, an ancient oak, its bark dark and gnarled, twisting upward like it held secrets in every knot. At its base, a hidden door, carved into the wood, lines etched deep and faded. The shape seemed almost alive, breathing faintly in the shadow of the trunk. A low hum escaped from within, soft, insistent. It wrapped around my chest, pressing lightly, calling me closer. I hesitated. The air smelled faintly metallic, like iron and wet leaves. Curiosity pressed against my mind, tinged with sharp threat of danger. I reached out. Fingers brushed the carved wood. Cold, rough, yet almost soft beneath my touch. The hum grew louder, wrapping around my bones, coiling in my chest. I stepped closer. Branches scraped against my arms, fog curling higher along my legs. The low hum seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat. Breath caught in my chest. I pressed my hand against the door. The hum deepened. Shadows around the oak seemed to stretch, folding inward, pressing against the mist. I traced the carved lines with my fingers. Each etching seemed to ripple slightly beneath my touch. The wood almost breathed, almost waited. I paused. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Leaves hung still. Branches leaned inward, casting long, dark shadows. The hum pulled at me, soft, insistent. I stepped forward. Closer. The air grew heavy, damp, alive. My hand hovered over the door. Cold pressed against my skin. A subtle vibration hummed through the oak. The fog pressed higher around my shoulders, wet and curling, coiling like fingers. I opened it. A cold breath escaped, soft, wet, lingering. The door swung slowly, revealing darkness inside. It smelled faintly of stone and decay, like something sealed for centuries. The hum grew louder, pressing softly against my chest, curling along my spine. Shadows within the doorway shifted, folding against each other in impossible ways. I stepped closer. The mist curled at my boots, pressing upward. The hum vibrated against my legs, through my chest. Something moved inside, something aware. I hesitated. The forest felt distant. Branches scraped softly in the fog, but the hum held me, alive in the doorway. It whispered without words, patient, insistent, pulling me forward. I took a single step. The doorway seemed taller, deeper than it should have been. Shadows stretched along its walls, folding in impossible angles. The hum pressed against my mind, coiling, curling, soft and cold. I stepped fully inside. The door swung shut behind me. The hum resonated through the air, thick and alive. I pressed a hand to the wood, but it was gone. Darkness pressed from every angle. Shadows shifted in ways I could not understand. The air was damp, heavy, clinging to my skin. The hum wrapped tightly around me, soft, insistent, inescapable. I tried to breathe. Cold mist curled along my chest, pressing in with every inhale. Shapes flickered in the shadows, bending, folding, moving against physics. Something watched. Patient, regret pressed against my chest. Every instinct screamed to leave, to step back into the forest. But the doorway had closed. I was inside. The hum softened, pulsing lightly, like the breath of the tree itself. The shadows pressed closer, curling along walls that should not exist. The air smelled of wet wood, earth, and something older, ancient and patient. I pressed my back to the wall. The fog lingered faintly around the threshold, but here inside it was thicker, alive, pressing softly against my skin. The hum hummed, soft, low, insistent, and I realized I never should have opened the door. I did not move. I could not. The hum wrapped around me. The shadows pressed closer. The door remained shut behind me. And I was alone with the oak and its secrets, with a low, insistent hum pressing against every inch of me. The forest hummed, soft at first, like a static whisper in the air. Branches leaned lightly over the trail, what would do, rustling with unseen movement. The ground smelled of damp moss, earth-rich and cold beneath my boots. The fog clung low, curling around my ankles, soft, persistent. I walked slowly. Each step pressed into the wet soil. Leaves crunched faintly, but the static hum pressed against my ears, a vibration in the air that seemed almost alive. Then the footsteps began, soft, deliberate, echoing mine. Yet nothing moved. I froze, heart beating against my chest. The footsteps matched the rhythm of my own, step for step, but there was no one there. The mist thickened. Branches brushed against my arms, cold, damp. The static hum grew louder, layered now with the echo of footsteps, merging with my heartbeat. I dared not look behind me. The sensation pressed against my spine, soft and insistent. like a shadow brushing closer. Each footfall fell with a strange, unnatural weight. I moved forward, slowly, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The static vibrated through my legs, pressing upward, curling softly along my chest. The footsteps followed, closer now yet still invisible. The mist seemed to pulse with them, curling around roots, pressing along the trail. A faint rustling reached my ears. Leaves, perhaps, or something deeper, moving beneath the fog. I breathed slowly, cold air filling my lungs, mist curling into my mouth. Step by careful step, I pressed forward. The footsteps continued. Not behind me, not ahead. Everywhere, merging, pressing, coiling with the hum in the air. I pressed a hand to a tree. Rough bark, cold and damp. The hum vibrated through it, soft, low, alive. The footsteps echoed again, step for step, as if the forest itself had gained a heartbeat. Shadows shifted in the fog. I could see shapes twisting, folding against each other, then dissolving. The footsteps pulsed, matching the rhythm of my own breathing, pressing along my spine. I stopped. The mist pressed higher around my legs, clinging, curling. The footsteps slowed, then quickened, a strange rhythm that mirrored my heartbeat. I turned my head slightly. Nothing, only fog and a deep static hum, wrapping around every branch, every root. Something unseen pressed close. Patient, I breathed slowly, feet rooted in cold, damp earth. The footsteps merged closer with my pulse. Every inhale carried the vibration. Every exhale pressed it against me. The forest seemed alive, aware of my presence. I moved again, step by step, careful, deliberate. The footsteps echoed and merged, wrapping around me, pressing softly yet insistently. Branches scraped lightly across my shoulders. Leaves pressed wet against my boots. The static hummed, echoed with every heartbeat. The forest was quiet in other ways, but alive in this vibration, this rhythm of unseen steps. I dared to glance to the side. Mist curled against the trees, shapes folding and dissolving in impossible ways. The footsteps pulsed closer, pressing into the rhythm of my own chest. I stopped again. The mist coiled higher, pressing against my legs, around my arms, soft, insistent, alive. The hum pressed against my ears, the footsteps echoing closer still. I pressed a hand against my chest. Heartbeat thudding, step for step with the unseen. The fog seemed to breathe, the forest alive with this quiet dread. The footsteps merged with every pulse, wrapping, curling, pressing in. I walked on, step by slow, careful step. The static hummed, the footsteps echoed, invisible, alive. And I knew the forest would not let me forget the rhythm of its heartbeat, the pulse of unseen steps pressing soft and insistent against my own. The fog hung heavy. It curled around the trees, pressing along the trail. The ground was soft, wet, the smell of damp earth and moss filling my senses. I moved slowly. Branches brushed against my arms, leaves wet with dew. The forest seemed quiet, yet it felt aware. Then I saw them, pale faces in the mist, fleeting, impossible to read. Eyes open, mouths frozen in expressions I could not name. I blinked. They vanished. The fog shifted, curling into emptiness. Cold, still, I pressed forward. Soft steps into wet soil. The mist wrapped around my legs, clinging, cold, wet. Every breath felt shared with the forest itself. Then they appeared again, faces floating just beyond reach. Some gazed at me directly. Others turned away, or dissolved before I could comprehend them. A low hum pressed through the air. I shivered. The fog seemed to move with each pulse of sound, pressing closer to my skin. I could feel the cold breath of it curling along my neck, along my arms. I tried to look longer, to hold one of the faces in my gaze. But every time I blinked, they vanished. A subtle emptiness replaced them, pressing into my chest. The forest held its silence. Branches swayed without wind, leaves brushing softly against my shoulders. The mist pressed tighter, every sense heightened, every shadow alive. I could smell the wet earth, hear the faint hum vibrating to the fog, feel it curling around my boots, soft and insistent. Faces flickered at the edge of my vision. Each blink carried them closer, then further, then gone. I felt my heartbeat echo in the empty air, merging with the soft, cold pressure around me. I walked on, step by careful step. The mist clung higher, pressing along my legs, coiling like fingers reaching from nowhere. The faces appeared again, some pale, almost translucent, some with hollow eyes, or eyes too deep to comprehend. The shapes dissolved and reformed, folded with the fog, impossible to hold or name. I pressed a hand to the tree. Rough bark, damp and cold. The faces lingered at the edge of my vision, soft, fleeting, like whispers without words. The hum in the air deepened. Low, insistent. The fog pressed more tightly. The emptiness around me grew. Each inhale carried the chill of the mist. Each exhale seemed swallowed. I paused. The faces vanished. The fog stood still. Cold emptiness pressed into my chest. The forest seemed to lean closer, silent, patient. I moved again, step by slow step. The mist swirled around my boots, touching, pressing, insistent. The faces flickered once more at the edge of perception, then dissolved again, leaving only the cold, empty hum. I tried to focus on the ground. Soft soil, wet leaves, the smell of moss. But the forest felt alive, aware of my presence. The fog coiled and twisted, and the emptiness seemed to follow me, pressing softly, relentlessly. I could hear the faint rustle of branches, feel the damp cold of the air on my skin, and in the fog, the pale faces waited, watching, fleeting, always at the edge of understanding. I kept walking. The forest stretched on. The mist pressed around me. The faces flickered in and out, pale, impossible, unreal. And the emptiness remained soft, cold, wrapping around my chest. I did not stop. I could not stop. The forest held me in its fog, and the faces lingered, always just out of reach, as I pressed forward, alone, in the hush of mist and silent, fleeting eyes. The fog lay thick across the river. A low, pale light filtered through, soft and damp. The air smelled of wet wood and cold stone. Each breath I drew carried the weight of silence, and the rustle of unseen leaves pressed close to my ears. Ahead, the bridge appeared, wood rotten, splintered, yawning over the dark water. It seemed fragile, yet something urged me forward. Every step closer made the fog swirl beneath, curling like fingers along the river's surface. I stepped onto the bridge. The wood groaned beneath my weight, soft cracks echoing into the mist. Each step left an imprint that vanished almost immediately, as if the bridge itself refused to remember me. I stopped. A shiver crawled up my spine. The fog beneath seemed to pulse, moving unnaturally, shifting in impossible currents. A cold breath touched the back of my neck. Though the air was still, I walked again. Planks swayed, rotten edges threatening to give way. A faint hum thrummed through the fog, pressing against my chest. Something heavy seemed to cross behind me. Not a sound, just pressure, a presence. I held my breath. The bridge creaked again, but this time not under my feet. Soft, deliberate, like another walking. Step, pause, step. I did not dare look back. The fog seemed to swallow everything behind me. I leaned forward, palms pressed against the damp wood, feeling its grain, rough and cold. The hum deepened, vibrating against my bones. The mist below twisted and rippled, shadows bending in ways they shouldn't. I moved slowly, step by careful step. Each plank threatened collapse. Each creak echoed like a warning. The fog seemed alive, pressing upward, curling around my legs, its cold moisture clinging to skin and clothes. I felt it again, the presence behind me, closer, impossible to see, but tangible in the pressure on my shoulders, the soft vibration through the wood. The river flowed silently below, yet the fog made it seem like motionless glass, reflecting nothing, absorbing sound. Even my own heartbeat seemed muted. Only the bridge protested, groaning under some invisible weight. I blinked. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a shadow shift in the mist behind me, gone immediately, leaving only emptiness and the low hum of the air. The fog wrapped tighter, and my chest tightened with unease. I pressed onward. The bridge narrowed. Planks blackened, warped by age and rot. The hum became more insistent, vibrating through the soles of my feet. Step, pause, step, each echo blending with my own breath, with the soft rustle of unseen leaves. I sensed the weight again, something unseen walking the bridge behind me, matching my pace, never rushing, never stopping. A presence both patient and patientless, like the fog itself had grown aware. I stopped, soft footsteps behind me, closer, yet no figure, no shadow, only the creak of rotting wood and the low, steady hum pressing into my mind. The mist below shifted violently, curling and rising like cold smoke. I felt the fog brush against my hands, clinging to my sleeves, cold and damp. The bridge groaned under some invisible load, its protest swallowed immediately by the thick air. I stepped forward, then froze. Something flickered at the corner of my vision. Shadow, movement. Something that should not have been. I blinked. Gone. The fog remained. The hum remained. The bridge still groaned, as if holding secrets far heavier than wood and water. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself in the wet, cold texture of the planks. Step by slow step, I crossed the hollow span. The fog swirled beneath, the unseen presence still close, moving, following, patient. Finally, I reached the far side. The bridge seemed to sag behind me, its planks whispering beneath the weight of nothing. I glanced back once. The fog swallowed the span. No shadow, no figure, only emptiness and the low, humming pulse of the air, pressing into my chest long after I left. The forest floor rose and fell beneath my feet. Roots twisted across the path, thick and gnarled. They glimmered faintly in the pale light, wet and dark. A low hum vibrated through the earth, subtle at first, then pressing against my chest. I stepped carefully. The roots seemed to pulse beneath my weight, breathing, alive. Each footfall sent a shiver up my spine. A faint rustling whispered from all directions. The air smelled damp and earthy, with hints of moss and decaying leaves. I reached down, brushing a root with my fingers. It throbbed softly, as if aware I had touched it. I looked around. Fog clung low to the ground, curling between trunks and stones. Shadows twisted and writhed with the roots, elongated by the pale light filtering through the canopy. Something stirred just beyond vision. I took another step. The hum grew louder, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. Each root seemed to shift slightly, twisting to follow me, curling like fingers along my path. A soft, static-like whisper brushed my ears. Indistinct but urgent, the forest itself seemed to breathe in tandem with the roots, inhaling cold, damp air, exhaling a presence I could feel against my skin. I paused. The hum intensified. The roots beneath my feet moved subtly, snaking across the path, rearranging themselves. I felt their pulse through my soles, a strange connection, like the ground had claimed a part of me. The fog thickened, wrapping around my legs, cool and wet. Each step became uncertain, the path beneath the roots shifting as I moved. I could hear soft rustle behind me, echoing the pulse in my chest. I bent down again. The roots were almost like veins in the earth, pale and dark, twitching faintly. The hum resonated through my fingers as I touched them. I pulled my hand back quickly, breath catching in the still, heavy air. A shadow passed over the fog. I turned slowly. Nothing, yet the feeling of being watched pressed into me, so palpable it weighed against my skin. The roots pulsed more urgently, a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed alive. I moved forward, careful not to step on the twisting paths of roots. The hum followed each step, rising and falling like whispered breaths. The forest smelled of wet bark and something else, something metallic, faint, as if the earth itself was bleeding. The roots began to weave together, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate, a network beneath my feet. Each pulse of the earth pressed into me, a warning, a beckoning. The fog shivered along the edges of vision, shapes flickering and dissolving. I stopped again. Soft footsteps echoed among the roots. I wasn't moving. The sound matched my heartbeat. Closer, and yet I saw nothing. I pressed onward, slower now. The forest seemed to contract around me, each root a finger of intent, curling and twisting, guiding and restraining. The hum rose into a low chant in my mind, soft, insistent, almost speaking in a language I could not understand. I crouched briefly, letting my hands hover above the roots. A vibration ran up my arms, warm and cold at once. I drew back, gasping softly. The pulse of the forest lingered in my chest. Step by step, I made my way along the path. The roots shifted behind me, closing the trail I had walked, erasing my passage in silence. The fog pressed tighter, curling around ankles, brushing against skin, carrying the faint, low hum with it. I glanced back one last time. Nothing but the writhing roots, silent yet pulsing, alive in a way the forest should not be. The fog swallowed the path, and the hum faded, leaving only the cold weight of awareness. I breathed slowly. The forest exhaled. The roots whispered. And I knew, somehow, the earth beneath my feet would remember me. The forest at night is a different kind of quiet. Not an empty quiet, a waiting one. The cold air bit my cheeks. I could feel the dampness of the fog seeping through my jacket. Each breath was a small, pale cloud in the moonlight. That's when I saw the first one, a soft, orange glow. Far away, between the thick, black trees and a lone lantern, hanging in the darkness, IT pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat. I stopped walking. The only sound was the rustle of wet leaves under my boots as I stared, trying to fix its position. But the light didn't stay still. IT seemed to drift, not left or right, but deeper. Then it was simply gone, swallowed by the night, and no fade, no flicker out, just absence. I took a hesitant step forward. The path was soft mud and forgotten pine needles, and my own breathing sounded too loud in my ears. Why would a lantern be out here? Who could have lit it? Another light bloomed. This one was farther up the slope. T on my left, at an angle that felt wrong. IT was impossible to reach in the path I was on. IT hovered there, a tiny, floating sun, beckoning. I changed direction, pushing through a tangle of low-hanging branches. Their wet fingers brushed against my neck. A cold shiver traced its way down my spine. The second lantern vanished as I got closer. One moment, it was a warm, promising glow. The next, nothing but the deep, deep green of the firs, leaving me standing alone in the dark, disoriented. A third light appeared almost instantly. This one was down in a shallow ravine IT cast long, dancing shadows on the mossy rocks. IT felt like a trick, a deliberate move on a board game I didn't understand. But the alternative was to stand still, and the silence behind me was growing heavier. I started to feel it, then a prickle on the back of my neck. The certain cold knowledge that I was not alone, that the quiet was not just waiting, IT was listening. I glanced over my shoulder. Only the maze of tree trunks, the shifting, formless fog, but the feeling was a weight in my chest, not a pressure. I kept moving toward the ravine like MY footsteps were softer now, trying to make no sound, trying to hear what was behind me. All I could hear was the blood humming in my ears. The lantern in the ravine went out. Not a flicker, not a blink, total blackness. And in that sudden, profound silence, the soft crunch point 30 paces behind me, the sound of foot settling on a bed of dry leaves. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My body had gone rigid. Every muscle was a tight, wired. I just stared into blackness where the light had been. MY heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Another light. This one was close. Too close that IT hung just off the path ahead. No more than 20 feet away. IT was smaller than the others. Its light was a sickly, pale yellow. IT didn't flicker with a flame. That IT just was not a steady, unblinking eye. It illuminated a small circle of ground. The twisted root of an oak, that a patch of pale, ghostly mushrooms. IT made the surrounding darkness feel even thicker, more solid. I had to make a choice. Move toward this strange, cold light dot, or stay here, in the open, with the thing that was following me. I took a step toward the lantern. The air grew colder. I took another. The light began to dim, not vanish, but fade, like a dying ember. I heard it again, that soft, deliberate footstep. Closer now, maybe 15 paces. There was no rustle after it, just a step, not a patient, relentless sound. The pale lantern was almost out of a faint, glowing smudge in the air. I took one last, desperate step forward. MY hand reached out into the space it occupied. Nothing that no warmth, no substance, just to chill the night. I was left in complete darkness. The only light was a weak moon, far above the canopy that I stood there, frozen, listening. The footsteps had stopped. Whatever was following me had stopped. IT was just standing there, somewhere in the blackness behind me, so very, very close, waiting for me to turn around, or waiting for me to start walking again. Lead it wherever the lanterns wanted me to go. The fog was everything now, the thick, white silence that swallowed the world. I couldn't see the trees anymore, just the vague, gray shapes of them, fading into nothing. My breath was the only motion, a small, frantic cloud that dissolved instantly in the damp air. The cold was inside my clothes now, the deep bone ache that had settled in for good. It was a feeling of being watched, not like a person watching you, but like the forest itself had opened 1,000 eyes, and every single one was fixed on me. I stopped walking. The mud was thick and greedy under my feet. Holding me in place, I listened. Nothing but the low hum of my own fear, the frantic beat of my heart in my throat. I turned my head slowly to the left. Only the fog, a solid wall. I turned to the right, more the same that a blank, featureless white. But the feeling didn't go away. IT intensified, a pressure on the back of my skull, that a weight between my shoulder blades. Something was standing right behind me, that I was sure of it. I spun around, my heart hammering, and my shoes made a wet, sucking sound in the mud. There was nothing there, just the empty path, disappearing into the mist, the same silence, the same cold. Yet the feeling remained, that a patient, unseen observer, that IT didn't feel angry or hungry. IT just felt present and infinitely still. I started walking again. Each step was heavier than the last, as if the fog had weight, that if it was pushing back against me, trying to slow me down, trying to keep me here. With it, the path began to slope downward. The air grew colder, damper. I could smell the wet rot of old leaves, the sharp, clean scent of pine sap, somewhere far away. My neck was stiff, tight with the effort of not looking back. Every instinct screamed at me to turn see what was there, but a deeper, colder instinct told me not to, that the moment I saw it, something would change forever. A branch snapped somewhere off to my side, a sharp, clean break. IT wasn't an accident. IT was a signal, the reminder that I was not alone. I kept my eyes forward, focused on the next step, and the next. The fog seemed to thin for a moment. Just ahead, I could see the dark outline of a large rock, a fallen log, covered in bright green moss. And then I saw it, the shadow, just a flicker, really. Darker than the other shadows, IT stood beside the fallen log, tall and impossibly thin. It didn't move, that IT just was a shape in the periphery that shouldn't be there, to a stain on the air. I froze mid-dash step, that MY breath caught in my chest. I didn't dare look directly at it. I kept my gaze soft, unfocused, trying to see it without truly seeing. The shadow remained a silent watcher. IT had no face and no features at all. Just a long, dark form that the fog refused to touch. We stood like that for a long time, me, frozen on the path to IT, standing beside the log. The only thing between us was a swirling, silent fog. Then, without a sound, it was gone, not a fade or a movement. IT was simply absent. The space beside the log was empty. The pressure on my skull vanished. The feeling of being watched lifted at a sudden, shocking emptiness. For a single, dizzying moment, I felt alone. Truly, completely alone in the vast, white forest. The relief was so sharp it was painful. And then I understood. The feeling was gone because it was no longer behind me. It was now in front of me, somewhere up ahead in the fog, waiting. I took a slow, shaky breath. The cold air tasted like damp earth and endings. There was nowhere else to go and no other path to take. So I started walking again. That MY steps were slow, deliberate. Each one carrying me deeper into the silence, toward the patient, unseen thing that was waiting for me to arrive. The forest had become a liar. The fog was a little thinner here. The pale, gray light filtered down from a hidden moon. I could see the trees again. Their bark was black and slick with moisture, like old wet stone. I stumbled over a root, catching myself in a rough, cold trunk, and my hand came away sticky with sap. The smell was sharp, like a chemical warning. I knew this place, I was sure of it. Ahead, The path should curve to the right, winding around a giant, twin-trunk pine at a landmark I had noted an hour ago that I held the image in my mind, the way its roots twisted above the ground like great, frozen snakes. I looked up. The path ran straight. The twin-trunk pine was gone. In its place stood a cluster of slender, white birches. Their leaves shivered in a breeze I could not feel. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was wrong. This was all wrong. I kept walking, them my eyes scanned the woods, trying to find something solid, something that would stay where I left it. The ground was a soft carpet of brown needles. They muffled my steps into whispers. There was a large, moss-covered boulder to my left. It was shaped like a sleeping animal that I stared at it. Memorizing the pattern of the moss, the deep green and pale yellow patches, I counted my steps as I passed at point 1, point 2, point 3. I glanced back over my shoulder. The boulder was still there, but the moss, the pattern was different. The deep green was now on the right. The pale yellow on the left, as if the stone had slowly, silently turned itself around. My breath hitched. I turned my head forward again, trying to calm the frantic rhythm of my heart. The trees ahead seemed closer now, their branches interlaced, forming a low, dark archway. I blinked. The archway was gone. The trees were spaced wide apart again, but their positions had shifted. A thick oak was now where a maple had been. The maple stood 10 feet to the left. It was impossible. This forest was not just alive, that it was restless. I tried to focus on a single tree, a tall, skeletal pine with a broken top. I fixed my eyes on it. I took 5 steps forward, not looking away. Its jagged top was a black tear against a gray sky. I lowered my gaze for a single second. Tio watched my footing over a gnarled root. When I looked up, the broken tree was gone, vanished. The space where it had been was empty, just a gap in the canopy, letting in the cold, dead light. A soft rustling started then. Not from an animal. That it was a dry, sliding sound, like bark rubbing against bark. It came from all around me, that a gentle, shifting chorus. I spun in a slow circle. The trees looked the same, and yet completely different. The path behind me was no longer a clear line. It was a confused tangle of undergrowth, as if no one had walked there in 100 years. I was lost, truly, hopelessly lost, not because I didn't know the way, but because the way refused to exist. The ground beneath my feet felt less solid. The very earth seemed to breathe a slow, deep pulse. The roots were shifting. I could feel them, coiling and uncoiling in the dark soil. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling that I closed my eyes, trying to find north, trying to find any direction that felt true. When I opened them, the forest had closed in. The trees were a tight, dark wall. There was no path left, just a small, clear space where I stood, a perfect circle of damp earth. The rustling had stopped. The shifting was done. The forest had arranged itself into its new formation, and I was at the very center of it, not a prisoner in a cage that was still deciding what shape to take. The trees simply ended. One moment, the dark, shifting wall of them. The next, an open space at a perfect circle of ground, maybe 50 feet across. It was covered in frost, at a thick, white fur of ice that glittered in the weak light. It looked like a field of crushed diamonds. Beautiful, and utterly wrong. The air here wasn't cold. It was the same damp, cool air from the forest I could feel on my face. Yet the ground was frozen solid. My breath did not make clouds. I stood at the edge, where the pine needles met the ice. The line was sharp at a definite border between two different worlds. I took a hesitant step onto the frost. It crunched under my boot to a sound like breaking tiny bones. The cold seeped up through the soles of my shoes, a deep, aching chill that the air refused to explain. I looked up. The clearing was open to the sky. The flat, gray sheet of clouds hung overhead, and moon and stars. Just that same dull light. But the shadows, they were all wrong. They stretched across the frost and the surrounding trees, long and thin. But they didn't lie flat. They seemed to stand up from the ice, rising like dark smoke. Their edges were too sharp, too defined. I took another step. The crunching sound was terribly loud, and I focused on a single shadow, point 1, cast by a tall, dead spruce. It stretched all the way to the center of the clearing, not a long, black finger pointing right at me. As I watched, The tip of the shadow twitched it curled, like a worm on a hot pavement. Then it settled back into place. My heart stuttered. I stopped walking till I held my breath. The silence in the clearing was absolute, a heavy, waiting silence. All around me, the other shadows began to stir. They didn't move much, just a slight trembling, the subtle shifting of their forms as shadow from an oak tree thickened. Its shape bloated for a moment, then thinned back out. Another, from a birch, seemed to split into two separate tendrils. They writhed slowly against the frost before merging back together. It was a slow, silent dance that puppets howl with no strings and no puppeteer. I looked down at my own feet. I had a shadow, to a small, dark puddle around my boots as I watched it stretched, pulling away from me. Sliding across the ice toward the other shadows, IT left a thin, black trail on the frost. I tried to lift my foot. Tio stepped back, but the cold had rooted me to the spot. A deep, penetrating numbness was climbing my legs. My shadow continued its slow crawl. It reached a long, pointed shadow from the spruce. They touched, and for a moment, they merged. A jolt went through me, a static shock deep in my bones. A sudden, overwhelming sense of being known. Every secret fear, every quiet shame. It felt like the shadows had just read it all. In that single, silent touch, I wrenched my foot free. The ice cracked loudly. The sound echoed in the perfect silence. All the shadows froze. Their slow, liquid movement stopped instantly. They were just shadows again, dark shapes on a frosted floor. But they were all pointing at me now, every single one. A circle of accusing fingers. A silent jury in a frozen court. The air was still not cold, but I was shivering. A violent, uncontrollable shaking that started deep inside. I took a stumbling step backward. Then another. My legs were heavy, dead with cold. The frost crunched in protest. I didn't turn my back on the clearing. I couldn't. I just walked backward, away from those still, pointing shadows. My own shadow trailed behind me, sluggish and thin. When my heels hit the soft pine needles at the edge, I flinched. The warmth of the forest air felt like a shock, a forgotten memory. I stood there for a long time, just watching the clearing. The frost did not melt. The shadows did not move again. They were just waiting, patient, knowing I would have to cross their space eventually. There was no other way to go. The path was my only tether. A thin, brown line of packed earth through the endless trees. I focused on it, the way it curved, the shape of the rocks embedded in the dirt. It was the only thing that felt real. I walked faster. My heart was a dull, tired thump in my chest. The fog was returning. It crept between the trunks, a slow, silent tide of white. I glanced down to avoid a puddle, just for a second. When I looked up, the path was blurred. The edges were no longer sharp. The dirt seemed to dissolve into the forest floor, like sugar in water. I stopped. My throat felt tight. I took a step forward, onto the clear part. The ground felt soft, uncertain. I looked behind me. The section of path I had just walked was gone. Not overgrown, just absorbed. The pine needles and moss had flowed over it, erasing my footsteps, erasing my way back. A cold panic began to bloom in my chest. I started to run. My boots pounded on the fading earth. The air was thick in my lungs. The fog swirled around my legs. It felt like running through water. The path ahead began to narrow. The trees on either side seemed to lean in. Their branches reached lower. I had to duck under a limb that hadn't been there before. Its needles brushed against my hair. A dry, whispering touch. I risked another look back. Nothing but a wall of solid white fog. And the trees, they were closer together now. A dense, dark fence where the open path had been. The trail under my feet was just a memory, a faint impression in the moss. Then, even that was gone. I stood still, panting, surrounded by trees and fog. There was no direction anymore, no left or right, just a forest in every direction. The ground was soft and spongy. It gave under my weight. I could feel the wetness seeping through my shoes. The smell of damp earth and decay was overwhelming. I turned in a slow circle. My eyes scanned for any break in the trees, any sign of an opening, but the woods were a perfect, unbroken maze. A soft rustling started above me that I looked up. The branches were shifting, not from the wind. There was no wind. They were moving on their own at a slow, grating sound of wood on wood. They were intertwining, weaving themselves into a tighter canopy. The gray light from the sky began to dim, shut out by a living, moving roof. This wasn't just a forest. IT was a thing that a single, vast creature, and I was a tiny, unwanted speck inside. I did an irritation. I took a step forward. The trees ahead did not move, but the space between them seemed to shrink. The gap was narrower than it had been a moment before. I took a step to the side. The same thing happened. The forest was contracting, breathing in, closing the walls around me. I felt a gentle pressure on my shoulder that a pine branch, resting against me. IT hadn't been there a second ago. I shrugged it off. That IT swung back, slower this time. Its touch was deliberate. This was it. The forest did not just want me lost. IT wanted me to stay. I stood there, in the shrinking space. The air was growing stale. The rustling above was a soft, constant reminder. There was no way out. The trail was gone, and the trees were finally coming to take its place. The trees began to thin. It happened so slowly I almost didn't trust it. The fog lifted, just a little. The oppressive weight of the branches overhead started to fade. I could see a light ahead, not a lantern. The dull, gray light in open field MY heart, which had been a numb, heavy thing, gave a single, painful throb. I didn't run that I was too tired for that. MY legs were leaden. Every step was a struggle against the forest's pull. The ground seemed to cling to my shoes at a final, desperate attempt to keep me. But I was winning. The air changed. The thick, rotting smell of the forest began to lift, replaced by the clean, cold scent of open air. And then I was through. The tree line ended at a crumbling stone wall. I put my hand on a cold, wet rock, and I stepped over it. I was standing in a field, long, dead grass stretched out before me, swaying in a gentle breeze. The sky was still gray, but it was a huge, open gray, not the closing ceiling of the forest. I turned around. The forest was a solid black wall behind me, an impenetrable line of trees and shadow. IT looked so normal from this side, just a patch of woods at the edge of a field. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. IT shook, trembled, a sob of pure relief caught in my throat. IT was over. And then I saw them, in the fog that still clung to the forest's edge, deep between the trunks. Pairs of points of light, pale and softly glowing, like distant stars seen through a haze. They were eyes. They did not blink. They did not move. They were just there, fixed on me. I took a step back. MY heel crunched on the frozen grass of the field. The eyes did not react. They simply watched, silent, patient. I counted them 0.1 pair, low to ground. Another, higher up, nestled in the branches, a third, set wider apart. They were all different, but they all held the same still, unblinking focus. I took another step back, then another. The field was safe that I could feel it. The forest's influence ended at the stone wall, but the eyes did not care about the wall. They remained in the deep shadows as a silent audience to my escape. I wanted to turn that TO run across this open field and never look back, but I was frozen by their gaze. That IT was a physical pressure that a weight on my skin. They weren't angry. They weren't threatening. They were just observing, noting my every twitch, every ragged breath. This was a final truth. The forest had let me go, but it was not done with me. I would never be truly freed. I would always belong to those woods, and these silent, patient watchers were the proof. I forced myself to turn my back on them. The feeling was agony. Like tearing a piece of myself away, I started to walk across the field. The dead grass whispered against my jeans. I could still feel them. Their gaze was a cold spot between my shoulder blades, not a permanent chill. I walked faster. The house was there at the far end of the field. Its windows were dark, but it was a real thing, a solid thing. I did not look back again. I didn't need to. I knew they were still there. I knew they would always be there. I am the edge of every forest. I am the depth of every shadow. Just waiting. Their pale, unblinking eyes forever fixed on my back.